Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, December 2nd, 2025. I am John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Well, guys, the time is upon us. It is December, and it is time for me to talk to you, our listeners, about commentary and why I am going to ask you for your support this holiday season. Commentary is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We are not profit seeking. We are an ideas based magazine, website, and podcast whose purpose is to defend the West and Western civilization, to speak out for the best that has been thought and said in the course of Western civilization, to defend the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and to stand as a bulwark against the forces that would seek to undermine them all. That is what we do here. That is what commentary has been doing in different forms for 80 years. And we are very proud of this institution and its history, and we want to strengthen it and keep it going. My main goal here is to ensure that we are still publishing a physical magazine when Commentary achieves its 100th anniversary in November of 2045. But every year we come to you with an annual appeal, as your emails and your probably your instant messages, your DMs suggest, with an appeal to ask you to give generously to Commentary to help us keep the lights on, to do what we do here on a daily basis. If you are a subscriber, thank you very much. You will be getting in the mail from us a letter that is doing what I'm doing here right now, which is asking you for your support. If you are not a subscriber, but you are a daily or even an occasional podcast listener, please understand that doing this is not free. You may get it for free, but we have rent, we have salaries to pay, we have work to do, we have institutions to promote. We have to make sure that this podcast gets to you in timely fashion and is produced adequately, and all of that takes money. And that is money that we need to raise because our subscriptions and our advertising do not cover our deficit, as is true of most nonprofit institutions. So if you go to our website at commentary.org, you will see a banner at the top of the page, and you will see in the middle of that banner the word donate. If you click on the word donate, you will be taken to a page that will make it very, very easy for you to donate at whatever level is comfortable for you. We are incredibly grateful for the support that we have received over the years. We need more. We need you to come through for us. And we are especially grateful to new donors, new listeners who turn into new donors, because that means that you understand that what we do here is of value. It's a kind of confirmation that what you're listening to is something that is of value to you. And of course, it is tax deductible because we are a nonprofit. So please go to commentary.org/donate, or go to our website and click on the donate tab at the top of the page and give generously. And you'll be hearing this message from me throughout the month of December. So I'm going to be a nag. Judaism is full of nagging, and this is the nag that I will be making of you this month. Gentlemen, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are in Moscow to talk to the Ukrainians. You know what? I'm gonna call an audible and shift to the news from yesterday. I went the wrong way because we spent half an hour yesterday talking about the kinetic strike on September 2nd in the Atlantic against the Venezuelan drug boat. and the story that appeared on CNN and in the Washington Post last Friday that said that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, had said, kill them all. And therefore, because there were survivors left in the water after the initial strike, there was a second strike, the purpose of which was to kill everybody else who was remaining in the water, which would constitute an unambiguous war crime. And I have to say that the New York Times yesterday evening around 6 o'clock dropped a story that fundamentally contradicts the story that appeared in the Washington Post and on CNN. Charlie Savage, not known to be a friend of the Trump administration or its handling of legal questions, and a couple of other reporters talked to 5 sources inside the administration who say that Hegseth never said that he never gave that order, and indeed that Admiral Bradley, who is the person who is in charge of the specific mission, certainly did not make any such suggestion, that they were, we don't know quite what happened with the second go-round. If there was a second go, we don't know what happened, but we now have a complete contradiction. Washington Post says Pete Hegseth said kill them all. New York Times says there's no evidence that Pete Hegseth said kill them all or was indeed in operational control of the strike on the boat on September 2nd. So that is an important corrective. We don't know what the story is. Congress needs to get involved, and I think will get involved in trying to deal with these contradictory accounts. But since we spent so much time on it yesterday, we needed to, I think, make this point today and then to discuss the history of false news reports tagging the Trump administration and Donald Trump and the people around him with patently illegal acts that turned out to be hoaxes or flaws or lies throughout the first term. And this, if it turns out that this story is not true, this will be the first story of this term that rises to the level of what Trump came honestly and fairly to call the Russia hoax.
Is it that? I mean, to my mind, what the Times makes clear is that this could very well be a very large distortion of what happened, because there. I mean, the Washington Post story made it sound as if Hegseth saw the boat hit once, saw 2 survivors, and said, "Finish them, kill those 2."
Yeah,
right. But Hegseth is not at all apologetic, nor to my mind should he be, about authorizing a fatal strike on the boat. The only thing that raised my eyebrow in the Times story, where they spoke to, I think, 5 people, or a handful of people,
5,
was that so there is a written version of authorizing the strike beforehand. Lawmakers have asked to see that, and the administration has refused to hand that over. Supposedly, let's see where that goes. That would shed more light, obviously, on this.
Yeah, and also it's the there's been kind of a shifting reaction from the administration. So, not to accuse anyone of lying, but the public, which version the public believes, they are very likely to believe the early versions. This was, by the way, one of the reasons that I did think that Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin did anticipate this particular case information coming out when they made the video saying to members of the U.S. military, you don't have to follow illegal orders, because it would that would color the news that they expected to come out. People would immediately associate the term illegal orders with that piece of news, right? And the strikes on the Venezuela boats. I do think that sort of thing sticks. And it may be on the media the media has a responsibility to get stories right, full stop. It is also on the administration's communication with the public, and its initial defiance tempered by sort of seeming to discover that there are real problems here and that Republicans are not all in on whatever the Trump administration says. And so there's been a shift from, we ordered a strike, to specifics, like Hegseth ordered one strike and then went about his business. And the person he ordered the strike, the person he commanded to order the strike, essentially piloted it from there and said, looked in at the boat, there's still a boat, so hit it again. But none of that involved conversations with Pete Hegseth. That's the sort of detail that we should have heard right away.
Well, so we don't know what's going on here. And I myself raised the possibility that you just mentioned, Seth, which is that the ad or the video or whatever it was with 6 former members of the military, Democratic members of the military, saying this odd thing about how you are not obliged under law to follow an illegal order seemed so peculiar, and that it seemed almost as though it was an effort to, as Tom Cruise does in A Few Good Men, do something melodramatic and obnoxious and hysterical to the commanding officer, Donald Trump, to make him say, "You're damn right I ordered the code red." People forget this scene, the scene where Tom Cruise in A Few Good Men says, "You can't," when he says, "I want the truth." And then Jack Nicholson loses it and says, "You can't handle the truth." Cruise's character is doing that deliberately. He is losing his cool deliberately as a strategy in the courtroom to throw Nicholson off and make him explode. And the question was, where did this come from? Why is it out there? What are they trying to get Trump to say? And he did react. He said, "You're seditious, you're traitors." And a lot of people on the MAGA right have been echoing this idea that they're traitors and all of that. And it just seemed, once we found out about this story, that there was maybe a precedent of something preceding it that triggered it. So this happens in September. Maybe the story is going around in military circles that the head of CENTCOM, who retired the day after the strike or something, was going around saying, this was not kosher. This was that when the story comes out, oh boy, it's going to be really bad. And in fact, they didn't say, "Yeah, damn right I did it," because they didn't do it. Like, Nicholson did order, Nicholson's character did order the code red, but Trump and Hegseth may not have ordered the code red. So they're not going to stand up and say, "I ordered the code red." Now, so not to use popular culture as a crutch too much, but it does help explain some of the mystifying behavior here. And it does evoke 2019 and the Ukraine issue that led to Trump's first impeachment. Because if you remember, members of Congress were making these weird kind of allusions to a whistleblower inside the administration who knew the truth, but he needed immunity. I can't remember what it was. It turned out it was Sasha Vinman, but there was it was like this, there's a big thing inside the administration, but somebody can't come out and tell the truth until we protect them or something like that. And so there was this kind of cloud of, there's something bad going on here in Oz, something very bad going on here in Oz. And then finally he was given immunity, came to testify, he told Congress what Congress wanted to hear, and then Vindman, and then they impeached Trump. This was almost like some weird version of that. If the New York Times story is true, then Hegseth and Trump are at the very least, or Hegseth is at the very least not guilty of the charge that was leveled at him in the Washington Post story. It does not absolve him or Trump or the administration of the very real questions about what the hell is going on in the Atlantic near Venezuela. Like that's a whole separate kettle of fish.
I mean, there are There are people, I mean, and serious people too. I mean, I don't agree with them, but who think that the entire operation that's been going on there is illegal.
Right. Well, can you elaborate on that? What is it about the operation? Let's put a weird thing that you don't think is illegal.
Well, I mean, they think that it's illegal because it's not authorized. I mean, it's authorized by Trump, but there's.
Well, I think there are two issues. There's the
Yeah.
authorization issue, and then there's the issue of the definition of the casus belli, right?
Right. Yeah, of defining the narco terrorist as a terrorist enemy.
Right. Or in other words, that drug trafficking has a legal definition and terrorism has a legal definition. And there are two different definitions, and you can't elide the two. In American law, we know what a trafficker is and we know what a terrorist is, and they're essentially using, this is the claim, they're using the definition of terrorist by adding the adjective, whatever you would call it, the prologue word narco, to say they're terrorists because they're using narcotics to enter our country and poison our people, and they're doing it in order to bring down our country. But there is no definition in law of narco-terrorism. There is only terrorism and narcotics smuggling.
And I've got to say,
both the federal laws have defined penalties, right? Andy McCarthy's point throughout this, that he's explained very well, has been that there are defined penalties for the defined actors in this, and he doesn't see anybody who fits the definition of an actor whose defined penalty would open him up to combat.
And it's important that you mention Andy McCarthy, because who has been on this podcast many times and is a close friend of ours and is known, his career, he was the U.S. attorney who prosecuted the first World Trade Center terrorist bombing case against the Blind Sheik. So if anybody knows the federal law defining what is terrorism in a U.S. courtroom, and remember, Andy believes that using a U.S. courtroom as a means of fighting terrorism is a mistake, and that these are acts of war that need to be fought not in a courtroom, but by our military. But he certainly has forgotten more precedent than we've ever learned about these sorts of things, and is himself not exactly a squish on the use of the U.S. military or anything like that. He's just looking at what he knows to be the law and saying this is unlawful or illegal, or at the very least the justifications are false or fallacious.
So I got to say, when I see Caroline Leavitt defending the administration on this, and she describes the operation, and she says it was defensive action and the threat was eliminated. I agree in the broadest sense, of course. Narcotics trafficking into the U.S. is a huge threat to the country. It kills Americans. That's why I'm fine with the operations. It's okay with me. I'm not complaining. But there's something linguistically off. Just when you hear that, because you see the video and you know that this is a strike that the U.S. chose to take. They weren't being fired on. We weren't taking fire. We were taking out a drug trafficker. Right. And to hear her describe it as the threat was eliminated, that's where you hear the confusion of the language of war, with the language of law enforcement.
Right. Not to get too philosophically in the weeds here, but as with like trans conversations, we have to create a division here between who's hurt by drug trafficking. Because if you say people under 18 drugs are being trafficked in America to people under 18 who are considered minors under the law, and therefore you are doing something to people who have no legal agency, and therefore we should come down on you like a ton of bricks, and like if we convict you in a courtroom, maybe we can sentence you to death or something. Problem with narcotics trafficking as a foreign policy, to end it as a foreign policy aim in itself, it's the same problem with gambling. It's the same problem with a lot of these things. Nothing is being done to the people who take illegal narcotics if they are adults. They are going out, they are buying them, they're taking them to their house, they're ingesting them. This is an act of adult agency. It's malign. It is illegal. It's illegal because we are trying as a society to protect people from an impulse that is destructive not only of them, but of the society at large. And it's also a weird time for us to be going through this war against drugs that goes kinetic, when I don't know how many states in this country have legalized the use of incredibly potent marijuana. Like, we're actually in a we're in a phase in the United States in which the country seems to be moving toward loosening restrictions on the use of drugs that were formerly considered illegal. And so there is a cognitive dissonance in us flying, having aircraft carriers that are flying planes that are blowing up boats. It's like we seemed societally to be moving in a different direction here. Am I wrong? I mean, I know there's a difference between fentanyl and pot. I'm not saying there isn't, although from what I gather about the strength of the marijuana that people are using, it can be as debilitating, and even psychosis inducing as harder drugs were in the 60s when marijuana was less potent. But something doesn't add up as a national cause.
Well, there is one other element involved in both the Venezuelan trafficking and let's say the fentanyl precursor from China, which is that these are regime-backed operations. The Venezuelan government and security services and intelligence are all involved in the trade, and all industry in China happens with the cooperation of the Chinese Communist Party. So in some and certainly in the case of China, they're very hard on drug use within their own borders. So there is an element of an attack on the U.S. here that I think is real on the part of foreign governments. But again, it's a complicated, layered sort of idea.
Right.
And we might also be getting into the thing we've discussed before, which is life in under a government that's governing under a claimed emergency at all times, right? Which is like, part of this stuff got the narco trafficking, the element of the narco trafficking that they're talking about really did get folded into economic policy too, because it's been used as justification, at least in part, for tariffs, right? And he says, we worked out a deal. They're going to, they're going to police fentanyl going outside of their country border, and we're going to cut tariffs, down by 5% or whatever. I mean, he's using that as economic policy, as foreign policy, and that the tariffs were themselves wrapped up entirely in the question of, does he have the power to do this? And his argument was, it's a national emergency. I have to do it. It's like COVID, but this. And so, he's sort of skating along on this. That's his way of thinking. He doesn't necessarily need a declaration of emergency to say he thinks we're in a state of emergency, but he's made it clear that fentanyl smuggling is part of what he sees as emergency policy making. And so everything associated with that, he'll go to 11. Now, the thing they're discovering is that it's one thing to have these emergency powers within your borders and only have to fight the Supreme Court. It's another to look like you've gone to war, that's a different kind of extension, in foreign policy. And that's why they're seeing this bounce back now, I think, in part of that. But it is part of I think, just he's living through an emergency worldview, and, this is part of that.
It's more than that, because he is the person who, in the American political discussion over the last 10 years, has attempted to harness some kind of weird combination of Jacksonian unilateralism and present day isolationist pacifism. Like, he's not a pacifist. He is a unilateralist. And he does say that every war that we fought since he was a kid was stupid. And he is complaining that too many people have died in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and he wants to end it. And he's got this entire body of MAGA that is, deeply concerned about the horrible death toll in the Russia-Ukraine war, like they care about death tolls in war anywhere else, as far as I can tell. But those are his people. The sort of, we now call them the Tuckerites, but I mean, whatever. Those are still his people. He harnessed them. We're going to talk tomorrow with Jesse Arm of the Manhattan Institute about this amazing research that he and the Manhattan Institute have done on Republican attitudes toward things, and a real split in the GOP between sort of traditional Republicans and what he calls new entrant Republicans, where there is a deep ideological divide, so severe that you would think that they could not coexist in the same party. But this is the conversation that we're having here. Trump's the one who has harnessed this idea that we fight unnecessary wars and that we need to stop fighting unnecessary wars. And now it's not exactly a war, because it's not like Venezuela is coming at us, but he's the one who has initiated kinetic military action against Venezuela, a country with which we are not at war, whose regime we don't like, and whose behavior we don't like, and whose ideology we don't like, and whose narco trafficking we don't like. But we don't like narco trafficking from Colombia either, and I don't see us going to war with Colombia.
It's very interesting, because if you think back to Trump's first trip to the Middle East this term, what did he say in Riyadh? He said, "We are no longer going to go around dictating to other countries how their government should run, what form of government they should have, and all that." And, here he is putting intense pressure, directly calling for Maduro to step
by Friday.
Down. Yeah.
By Friday. He has said, get on a plane by Friday.
Yeah.
This week. Now, if that works, it's going to be amazing. And what's more, it'll be a vindication of exactly the opposite of what he said in Riyadh, which, of course, is a classic thing where he wrote, where Stephen Miller or somebody wrote him a speech that was full of the administration's evangelical view that it's anti-neocon and doesn't want to go around doing this stuff. And then he practically, in practical terms, is like more neocon than the neocons. Like, it's not even that, we're going to support democratic, movements inside countries and provide them with covert aid to teach them how to, publish the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in Kazakh and that sort of thing. That's what neoconism is. He's like, I'm going to blow up your boats until you get out of here. Like, that's like taking it to another level. That's rollback. That's not containment. And so,
and also
that'll be pretty funny if it works.
And considering the way he's dealt with deadlines, right? He said about Iran, it's 2 weeks tops, and then like 48 hours later, he sent the bombers. Maybe if I'm Maduro, I make sure to be out, by
Wednesday.
Thursday open of business, Thursday 9 a.m. Maybe I don't take till Friday close of business. So it makes you wonder if he has something else up his sleeve, what the or else is, because in the recent past, he has had an or else up his sleeve.
I mean, you don't think of Trump as a poker player because poker is a game of strategy and not power. And there's a lot of you fold a lot, and you don't fold, and you do. That's not his. That's not. He's more like a blackjack player who triples down on a bet or something like that. But yeah, I mean, if you look at it as, am I bluffing? Am I not bluffing? Do I mean it? What happens when Friday comes and goes and Maduro's not out of power? What did it mean that I told him to do it on Friday? Now, it's not like he came out and gave a speech and he said, I told Maduro to leave on Friday. That makes it like a public confrontation where Maduro, but it's leaked to us that he said, get out by Friday. And so we've finished the conversation here, at least about Hegseth and Venezuela. And now we can talk a little about Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff in Moscow to try to negotiate an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. And we don't know a lot about what's going on. It does appear that the Witkoff approach is to say, let's all make a deal and we can all be friends somehow, and we can build buildings and you can have and we're going to make Ukraine stop, and you'll get what you got, and maybe you'll get a little more, as a little, taste. And Ukraine is now going around to Europe saying, help us. The United States appears to be negotiating essentially against us and on the side of the Russians. What are you going to do to help us if we have to go crosswise of Trump? And I still think that Putin says no. I don't think Putin is going to accept any deal that doesn't give him not only control of every piece of territory at this moment, but more, so that he can say he beat Ukraine, he won, it was a glorious victory, and he beat Trump. He'll want to walk around saying he beat Trump and beat the West and beat the Europeans, and and now they better watch out and take care of him. A little like Hamas, let's say. Like, I don't know what his incentive is to end the war, except that he would want the Russian people to stop dying, which he clearly doesn't give a shit about. So I do think that all this is going on, and that it could really parallel Hamas, and that Hamas negotiated, and they always came to no until finally their sponsors came and said, no, the answer is yes. Because we're going to basically expose, you're all going to die. So say yes, or we're going to let them kill you. Meaning the political leaders, not the people in Gaza itself. But there's no one to do that to Russia. Russia doesn't have anybody to say, you better do this or we'll kill you.
Right. So you have all the obstinacy without the threat.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, and you also have losers on the U.S. side, which is the other part of this that is really that should throw a wrench into it, right? Which is that there's going to be no deal with Putin unless without a piece of Ukraine that is a humiliation to Ukraine. And so when they've gone around the Middle East, trying to turn the peace talks into real estate talks and or business, proposals, that hasn't come along with, Israel is going to have to give up the Gaza envelope and move back further from and make that a no man's land. It hasn't come up with anything like you have to lose something tangible. The American ally involved has to lose something tangible. But with Ukraine, there's no deal unless Ukraine loses something tangible. And that is why, according to the Wall Street Journal, which has a very long report on the sort of business angles of all this. But one of the takeaways in the article is how little the relevant agencies of the federal government know about what Trump's negotiators are doing until they do it, and who they're meeting until they meet them. There's one in one case, Witkoff is meeting with the Russians in Alaska, and the Treasury Department learns about it from from the UK, from intel that they got from Britain or whatever. So that's why they're sort of going around this, because the federal government is set up to filter these sorts of things all the way through, and there is no filter right now in going around everybody, including General Kellogg, who is the supposed to be the special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, the war, and who is leaving his post, and who I assume is not going to be replaced, or maybe replaced with a mannequin. But the point, the point is that we've entered this sort of situation where it's like Trump and the inner circle know it's not just they're the ones running it. It's they at times are the only ones who know what they're planning on offering. Everybody else has to play catch up. And because this includes a U.S. and Western ally, a potential NATO, ally or whatever, depending on where you sit on what Ukraine should be after the war, but also sitting on the border of Western Europe, right? Our European allies are right there, and not just Western Europe. I mean, Poland, and others. And so, we're sort of the Europeans see us taking a very European problem and making hay out of it. The response from the Trump administration to them would be, and not without some justification, I've been telling you since 2016 that you all should put more into your own defense. Europe should bulk up its defense. You guys should take this seriously. You haven't been taking Russia that seriously, and that's why somebody else has to step in and do this. And it's kind of late to be complaining to us now, because we've been at this for years, and you haven't done what we said to beef up your own security. Otherwise, you can handle it yourself. And if you don't like our deal, then in the future, you will make sure you have one in place to handle it yourself. That's kind of the debate here.
If eastern parts of the Donbass that Russia doesn't even control yet, I shouldn't even say yet, that doesn't control, if that is on offer, I think that is tempting for Putin at this point, because of the pace, the slow, grinding pace at which the Russians have been getting moving forward. If you deliver to Putin a region that would have taken him a year more, or 2 years, or more, 5 years more to get, if you just hand it over, I think that he, that may be an offer that he would look at more than once, and it would be more than a humiliation to Ukraine. It would be a travesty. These people there don't want to be part of Russia, and suddenly they would be.
The really complicated part here is what Abe brings up, which is that while the Ukrainian effort to turn the war into an offensive counterstrike against the Russians, or a counter-offensive against the Russians, failed, Russia's war aims for the last 3.5 years have not been secured in almost any way. The amount of territory that they have managed to get into their control is infinitesimal. Like, Ukraine's a big country. Like, I think in square footage terms, it's the largest country in Europe. They are on one edge of it, and this is a grind like we haven't seen since the Second World War. And of course, under normal conditions, the Russians would be maybe looking for an off-ramp. But they're not, because Putin doesn't have the same incentives that even dictators or totalitarians of the past have had here. This was a war of choice. He entered into it. It was a blunder. He's now he's invested enormous amounts of blood and treasure, and he needs to come away with something where he can say the glorious future of our ancient republic dating back to the 9th or 10th centuries has been, we are restoring. And Ukraine says, okay, let's end the war. Theoretically, we'll end the war. Here's what we need. Russia never attacks again. We're not having limits on our military. You give us some kind of security guarantee, so if they cross the border, you're going to come in and stop them. Since you're stopping us, we want to go on, but you're going to stop us. We'd like NATO membership. So first, Trump says NATO membership is not on the table. Okay. Second, he seems to be willing to talk vaguely about some kind of a security guarantee. I don't know how Putin accepts that, accepts the idea that the United States holds the blackmail hand over him, saying, you know what, I want to take another bite out of the Donbass. I want to move a little further west. I want to keep going, there's nothing to stop him. And so, and they're not winning. Like, Russia is not winning this war.
But that's a key thing about what's frustrating people about Steve Witkoff. I mean, let me read a quote from the Journal story, which is, they mention that, that Ukrainians are fighting hard, and, he's asking them to make, what they see as ridiculous sacrifices. Here's the quote. Ukrainians have fought heroically for their independence, said Witkoff, who has tried to inspire Ukrainian officials with the idea of soldiers disarming to earn Silicon Valley scale salaries operating American-built AI data centers. And then one more quote, it is now time to consolidate what they have achieved through diplomacy. So Steve Witkoff saying it's time for the Ukrainians to consolidate what they have achieved is kind of insane, right? I mean, this is what we're saying here is that Ukrainians have lost territory in the war. I don't think that anybody disputes that the size of Ukraine has been reduced and not expanded.
But most of that,
pitching it as an independent, happened. Like a war of independence, right. Like saying, you guys survive.
But most of that territory was taken before the war. We're talking about Crimea and the Donbass. Most of the stuff that Ukraine is being asked to acknowledge is now Russian territory does not implicate this war.
Well, there was a big push at the start of the war. I mean, where Russia gained a lot of ground, and then it became fighting for every inch, poorly.
Right. Well, so
to say they have to, now's the time to consolidate what they've gained through diplomacy is, it doesn't reflect reality. Not because Ukraine has gained the esteem of the world in how they fought, but the U.S. behind this is still going to be asking Ukraine to subtract something, even if it's not from this war, although likely would be. They're asking something of Ukraine, and calling it consolidate the gains is making people not trust Witkoff as an interlocutor here.
But this is, that's a very Trump administration thing to try to talk into existence a preferred reality. It happens all the time. And it's like when it's Trump's initial Gaza proposal, that came off the cuff. And when they do it, each time it enjoys this sort of half incepted phase, where it's almost like a thing that is really about to happen, and then reality, that the mirage dissolves, and then you're back to reality.
I mean, we're in another weird place, which is that the Witkoff stated, or maybe he hasn't said it publicly, but what the Wall Street Journal tells us is Witkoff is talking like Thomas Friedman in the late 90s. Look, we'll make a deal. We'll integrate economically. We'll do a lot of. They'll make a lot of deals together. Russia and us, get them in good. All of that. We've seen this movie before. This was Putin from 2000 to 2008. This was, I looked into his heart, George Bush said, and I see someone I can do business with. Hillary Clinton went over with the reset button. This whole notion that, proper, understandable incentives for a guy like Putin is, let's knit you into, global neoliberalism, and, you'll prosper and everybody will just like be drinking from the same fountain. And that is not Putin's game. Like, how it's a quarter century already. It's time for us, and time for, I know Steve Witkoff is like basically 6 months old. Like, he has no idea, never heard of Ukraine. He couldn't spot it on a map. Trump said, do to Ukraine what we did to Gaza, see if you can figure it out. So maybe he's not conversant with this, but Putin's incentive structure is not to become another Western, like he already has $20 billion put away in bank accounts. He's not getting anything more from it. He's already arrested everybody who could be a capitalist. He decided that Western capitalism was eating away at Russia's moral framework and all this. Though that stuff that Witkoff thinks is the carrot is not the carrot to him. The only carrot to him is Ukraine. He wants us to say, take Ukraine, or, we'll give you a lot of Ukraine without your having to fight for it. And then he can go and do what he wants to do, which is say, I beat you. I beat Zelensky. I beat Western Europe. I beat America. I am the man. And, watch out Baltic states and watch out Poland, because if you displease me, I already have the precedent where the United States is coming in and saying, nah, it's fine. You can go to war in someplace and we'll let you keep what we'll let you keep what you kill. Well, we're not going to do anything to stop you, which is why the Ukrainian position is make assurances that Putin goes this far and no farther, or we can't agree to this. I don't know what we're going to do if we, I don't know what's going to happen to Ukraine if the United States literally turns against Ukraine. But that's the situation. Meanwhile, according to the Institute for the Study of War, it is likely that Russia will reject this proposal. And it will reject this proposal because it's not maximalist enough.
Right.
They want more. The Russians want more. The Duma wants more. The mill bloggers who are the commenters on the war want more. They think Putin will be, the American proposal is not generous enough to Russia and doesn't make the humiliation of the West potent enough. So
on this point, John, that, what would happen were we to turn against Ukraine actively and sort of show the world that, the U.S. will not push back on a tyrant who invades like that. It reminds me that before the Operation Midnight Hammer in April, before we took out the Iranian nuclear facilities, we were just about at that point regarding Iran. It had been some 20 years that a succession of American presidents were talking about we cannot let Iranian go nuclear. We cannot let them have a weapon, whether by, Bush talked strikes, Obama did his deal, whatever, and 2 decades worth of saying that without doing anything started to look like the U.S. is out of that game. They're not going to, and so important. One of the most important things about the strike is that having done that, it erases the decades of doubt, and it resets the stage for bad actors.
Right.
And we don't want to reset it again in the wrong direction with this.
Let me offer you a fantasy scenario and see how you think this is going to go. Because again, I mentioned we're going to talk to Jesse Arm tomorrow about this poll of Republicans that is so illuminating. The fantasy scenario is it goes like Gaza and Hamas and Iran. And Trump's been spending now 9 months trying to get the Russians to see reason. And he will now present them with a plan that he thinks is incredibly generous. You get what you want. Maybe we'll give you a little more. Though the Ukrainians reject it, we'll try to see if we can make the Ukrainians set a limit to the size of their army, which will make it impossible for them to be a powerful oppositional force should something happen. All of that. He sent his son-in-law. He sent Witkoff. He's doing what he can do, and Russia says no again for the 6th or 7th time this year to him. And a couple of times this year, he's gotten angry and said, he obviously wanted to turn on Zelensky, and Russia kind of wouldn't let him. Like, Russia kept rejecting what seemed to him to be perfectly acceptable ideas. And now they've gone a little further, and Russia rejects this. So here's my fantasy scenario. Following your example of the Israelis and Iran and America, he says, the hell with it. And he sends Ukraine a huge amount of weaponry and American advisors and people to help them fly the planes, and says, just do whatever damage you could possibly do. What does J.D. Vance, what do the people in his coalition who are resolutely, weirdly oppositional toward Ukraine for reasons we don't need to get into, but for which the word rhyming with smanty schmematism might play a large role. They are still, it's all the true Trump. The true Trump wants to end the war in Ukraine. The true Trump is the true Trump. Do they say, all right, that's it? He's now just another tool of the deep state. He's given in. He's given in to the internationalist the neocons have something on him, and we're done with him. Or do they try again? This isn't going to happen, so maybe this is a dumb counter, proposition. Or do they try somehow to shoehorn this into MAGA?
Well, they've always tried to shoehorn pretty much everything into MAGA. Israel has been the one exception that, a certain wing has not, accepted. But I think that, Vance, the question is, what do these people think about Vance, right? In this, because Vance is going to respond. Let's say Trump does this. Vance's response is going to begin. I don't know exactly what he's going to say, but I know that the first words are going to be, the president has always said, right? Because right. Vance is in the administration. He's the guy. He is waiting to take a handoff, and he is focused on not fumbling the handoff. Yeah. And so his response, as it has been in the past, is, but what makes this more complicated than, say, the Iran strike is the Iran strike was an easily defensible, realist foreign policy move. If you think about it, no boots on the ground, no air defenses whatsoever. Israel controlled the skies over Iran at the moment the U.S. planes were sent, right? So it was an open door to walk through and walk back. Nobody stopped there. Nobody got hurt. And that was literally the end of it. And then Trump said, you're done, Bibi, turn around those planes, whatever. So that was an easier one to make the case for. This is harder. It's harder to make the case for, for them, for giving all these weapons to Ukraine and laying out the scenario that you lay out, because that is, to them, a massively aggressive move. Because part of what they've been arguing is not just, as in Iran, this might lead to war and Americans may die and you're going to pull us into a conflict. But they have been arguing specifically Putin's going to nuke Europe. Or, they've been arguing apocalyptic scenarios about how there is no limiting principle on the Russian side in terms of a response. And so how are they going to handle it? I don't know. But J.D. Vance is going to have to be in it enough to raise the hackles and suspicion of that wing of the party. And then that wing of the party is going to be without someone on the inside, high up, to lean on for this, right? Where part of the reason the Groypers can get away with what they get away with is because they can just pretend that JD Vance is their friend. He doesn't say anything one way or the other, and that's that. He's going to be the new, it's like that thing we talked about last week, a couple of weeks ago, Nick Fuentes making the two hats, a Make America Great Again hat, or is, America First or MAGA. JD, if Trump does this, JD goes into the same bucket that Trump does. And I think that just disempowers this wing, because they have no threat. They can't say, well, JD Vance is going to cut you loose when he takes over the party.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think obviously, aside from Vance, every other person in that wing of MAGA would lose their mind.
Right.
They lost their mind over the successful in and out Israel strike. I mean, as Seth says, we had an open door, and it was this perfectly executed, quick thing. That put the fact that it worked was even worse for them.
Yeah. At what point, if Russia rejects this plan, whatever this plan is, it's going to be very interesting to see, what is Trump going to be patient with that response? Is he going to let it go and come back in 3 months with more ridiculous negotiating crap? Until the Ukrainians have had enough and say, we just can't fight anymore, we're just going to have to give in. There's no, that's why Russia would be, you would think sort of like, it's like what Abba Eban said, right? The Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This is actually a huge opportunity for Putin. He doesn't see it that way, and he knows better who his audience is than we do. But he's not going to get a better deal I don't think he'll get a better deal from the United States in this. Trump is more likely to wash his hands of playing any kind of role in this. Of course, you can't really wash your hands, because then there's the question of, what do you do about Ukraine? And maybe Seth,
right, but also washing your hands is a Putin win. Putin's happy for Trump to get frustrated and throw up his hands. He almost wants that more than anything else.
Unless washing your hands means, all right, everything in the pipeline goes to Ukraine. What do they want? Just give them what they want. We'll sell them what they want. Well, I'll make the Europeans pay for it. How about that? We'll send a bill to the Europeans. And then the Europeans will claim they paid for it, and we'll say, oh, we took the money for it. And of course, they won't have paid us for it, and we didn't take the money for it. But, as a face-saving thing. I don't know. I'm making stuff up here. So it's...
that's okay. So are they. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's so hard to even talk about, because I've watched the administration zig and zag on this, so much. I mean, the general thrust has been to try to coax Putin into some deal, to talk very, very positive talks, very promising meeting, getting very close, and then there have been these few times that Trump has totally turned on Putin. And the last one was a pretty big deal. Imposing sanctions and lifting restrictions on firing Western American-made weapons deep into Russia, and then now, but here we are again. It's exactly where we were almost a year ago. So I don't know. I don't know if he just keeps zigging and zagging or what.
Okay, I'm going to make a quick recommendation of a book I have not yet read, but it just popped into my Kindle today because I pre-ordered it. And it's an interesting guy and an interesting writer that I want to praise and see where it goes. This is Tim Blake Nelson. Tim Blake Nelson is an actor. You'll know him as he was the real hillbilly in Oh Brother Where Art Thou. He is the villain in Captain America with Harrison Ford as the Red Hulk. He was on Watchmen as one of the cops. He is one of that guys. You would recognize him. He's a very interesting character. Playwright, film director in the 90s, ended up almost as an accidental actor by getting cast in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, though he had studied at Juilliard. Anyway, he's written plays. He wrote a play about Socrates. And he wrote a novel last year called or a couple of years ago, called City of Blows, which is a sort of a history of Hollywood, a novel about people in different eras in Hollywood that is very good and surprisingly powerful and interesting and funny. And he has a new novel out called Superhero, which is about the making of a superhero movie, which again, I have not yet read. But he, of course, as I say, was played the villain in Captain America, Red Hulk, or whatever the hell it was called. It was terrible. It was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. He was pretty good in it. So this is obviously a deeply informed book about a very interesting cultural topic. He is a wonderful actor. He was in a great movie 2 years ago called Old Henry, which is about which you can find on streaming, which is about a taciturn farmer at the tail end of the beginning of the 20th century, and his son who is bored and exhausted by his father who won't say a word and won't do anything, and then some gunmen show up at their door to take over his farm, and it turns out that Old Henry is not who he appears to be, and is in fact a legendary gunfighter from the Old West, who is now ended up in his 60s trying to save his kid from the life that he led. It's a fantastic movie, also worth seeing. But so my recommendation today, and we could read it together and see how it goes, is Tim Blake Nelson's Superhero. So we'll be back tomorrow. Remember what I said about commentary.org/donate. And for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the camera bright.